Listen. Practice. Speak. Practice makes you perfect.
All right, so get ready, because today we're diving deep into how someone figured out how to learn English.
Mm-hmm.
And guess what? They totally ditched those boring textbooks.
Yeah.
And they turned it into a wild learning adventure. Pretty cool, huh?
Really cool.
Who knows? Maybe you'll even pick up a tip or two for yourself, even if you're not, learning a new language.
I think so.
Okay, so tell me more.
Well, this source is really fascinating because it jumps right into why the traditional way of teaching English sometimes just totally fails.
When you mean, what's the problem?
Well, it's like they give you all these screwdrivers when
Right.
what you really need is a hammer.
I'm listening.
They spend so much time teaching you grammar and how to write perfect sentences, but then, boom, you're out in the real world and
Right.
people are talking a mile a minute with all this slang,
Yeah,
It's no wonder people feel totally lost.
I know exactly what you mean. I remember spending years, diagramming sentences in school.
Oh, yeah.
And then the first time I went to, Italy and tried to order a coffee in Italian,
Mm-hmm.
my brain just, shut down.
Happens to the best of us.
So how did this person in the source, get past that, that disconnect?
Well, they did something really clever. They kind of made their own immersion experience.
Oh, okay.
But without actually having to travel.
Wait, hold on. Immersion without traveling?
Yeah.
I'm all ears. Tell me everything.
So the idea is that you're surrounded by the language all the time, even in little bits and pieces.
Right.
It's kind of like how we learn our first language. You're just immersed in it from day one.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So they basically recreated that environment, but with English.
Okay, I mean, that sounds great in theory, but how do they actually do that?
Well, they started with something super simple. They changed their phone settings to English.
Really? Just like that?
Yeah, think about it. You're on your phone all day.
That's true.
So every time you go to use an app or check a menu,
Mm-hmm.
you're forced to use English.
Oh, that's actually really smart. It's like you're constantly picking up new words and phrases without even realizing it.
Exactly. It's like passive learning, but way more sneaky.
I like it.
And then they took it up a notch. They started following English-speaking content creators on YouTube and Instagram.
Oh, that's a good idea.
So they were learning while also watching funny videos and keeping up with the latest trends.
Did they say which creators they followed? Always looking for new people to watch.
They didn't mention any names, but the point is they were watching things they actually enjoyed.
Great.
So the learning felt natural, not forced.
I think that's so key. If it feels like a chore, you're not going to stick with it,
Absolutely. Plus, it's not just about the words themselves. It's about picking up on the slang, the humor, the cultural references, all those things you won't find in a textbook.
Yeah, for sure. So they changed their phone settings. They're watching English content.
Mm-hmm.
What else? What other tricks do they have up their sleeve?
Well, they also started watching live streams.
Ooh, live streams. What's so
Yeah.
special about those?
Well, it's real-time conversation exposure. Think about it.
You're listening in on an actual conversation.
Exactly. It's like eavesdropping on a native speaker's thoughts.
I like that.
It helps you develop your listening comprehension skills in a way that's so much more natural than listening to a recording.
Okay.
It's the difference between reading sheet music and actually going to a concert.
That's a great analogy. So speaking of listening, I've got to know what kind of listening hacks they used, because I feel like that's where I struggle the most, understanding spoken English in real time.
Oh, for sure.
Did they have any, secret weapons?
They did, actually, and some of them are pretty out there.
Okay, give it to me.
They started playing online video games that require you to, talk to your teammates.
Wait, you mean, for fun?
Yeah, they literally turned gaming into a language learning tool.
Wow.
It forced them to understand and respond quickly in English, all while having a good time.
That is so brilliant. I love that it's like tricking your brain into learning without it even knowing.
That's the idea. It's tapping into implicit learning.
Implicit learning. What's that?
It's basically how we learn our native language. You're not sitting there memorizing grammar rules. You're just using the language to achieve a goal.
I see.
And in the process, you're picking up those rules naturally.
So it's not just about playing games. It's about choosing games that force you to use English.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. What other, unusual listening hacks did they try?
Well, they also did something called dubbing practice.
Dubbing. I've never heard of that.
It's pretty simple. You mute a movie or a TV show,
Got it.
and then you try to speak the lines in English, matching the actor's lip movements.
Oh, okay. So you're like your own voiceover artist.
Exactly. It's a fun way to practice pronunciation and connect spoken words with their written counterparts.
Yeah, That makes sense. It's like you're training your ear to hear the sounds and then reproduce them.
Right. They also talked about doing online listening challenges.
Oh, yeah, those are great. I get really competitive with those.
Those too. It's like a game. And finally, they did something a little more low-tech.
Okay, what's that?
They started listening to English radio during their commute.
Ah, good old-fashioned radio.
It's a great way to hear different accents, speaking speeds, and topics all in one place.
Yeah, for sure. It's like immersing yourself in a world of English.
Right, so we've covered immersion and listening, but what about the biggest hurdle?
Yeah.
The dreaded speaking barrier.
I know, that's the part that always trips me up. So how did they go from passively listening to English to actually speaking it confidently?
Well, you might be surprised by their approach. They found some really clever ways to practice speaking without even leaving their home country.
No way. Tell me more.
They actually started joining virtual speaking clubs.
Oh, yeah, those are pretty popular now.
Yeah, it's like you have this online group where people can just practice speaking together.
Right, but isn't that a little scary? Especially when you're first starting out?
I know what you mean, but that's actually one of the best things about them. It's a super safe space to make mistakes.
That makes sense.
People are there to give you feedback, and you can learn from everyone else who's learning too.
Yeah, it's like training wheels for speaking.
Exactly.
Did they mention any specific platforms they liked or groups they joined? I'd love to check some out.
They didn't name any specific ones, but it's more about the idea.
Okay,
Finding that community where you feel comfortable practicing.
that makes sense.
Plus, the cool thing about virtual clubs is that you meet people from all over the world.
Oh, that's true. So you get exposure to all kinds of different accents and speaking styles.
Exactly. It's like having a built-in support system for your language journey.
I like that. But let's be real, even with a supportive community, it can be tough to make yourself practice speaking. Did they have any tips for making it a habit?
They did, and this one's a little different. They would narrate their day out loud in English.
Wait, like talking to themselves?
Yeah, basically.
That's kind of interesting.
It sounds weird, but it's actually super effective.
Okay, how so?
Well, it's like you're turning all those everyday tasks into little language practice sessions.
Did they say what kind of stuff they would talk about?
Not really, but probably just like normal things,
Yeah.
like what they did at work, what they ate for dinner.
So it's about thinking in English.
Exactly, not just translating from your native language.
Right, that makes sense.
And that helps you become more fluent and spontaneous when you actually speak.
It's like you're training your brain to think in English.
Exactly.
And it's not just random rambling, right?
No, they also looked for more structured opportunities to practice,
Okay, like what?
like joining online debates and discussions.
Ooh, I like that. It's like you're taking your language skills to the gym.
I love that analogy.
You have to come up with arguments, express your opinions clearly, and it's all in English.
Yeah, and they chose topics they were actually interested in.
So it's not a chore.
Right, it's a way to connect with other people while also improving your English.
Genius. Did they do anything else?
Believe it or not, they even used English when they had to contact customer service.
No way. Customer service calls.
Yeah.
I hate those, but now I'm kind of seeing them in a new light.
It's all about finding those little ways to use English in your everyday life.
Yeah, pushing yourself out of your comfort zone.
And it's not just about the speaking itself, it's about having that growth mindset,
That's so true. It's about embracing those moments when you feel awkward and knowing that it's all part of the process.
Absolutely. Okay, so are you ready for this next one? Because it really blew my mind.
Okay, hit me with it.
They started using storytelling to help them become more fluent.
Wait, really? Storytelling?
Yeah.
It sounds so simple.
It is, but it's so powerful.
Okay, so did they take a writing class or something?
Not really. They made it more fun. They would pretend to be like historical figures, and then they would narrate events in English. It's like making up their own little plays.
That's such a cool idea.
It makes learning more engaging and memorable.
Yeah, for sure. Did they say which historical figures they like to pretend to be?
They didn't, but you can choose anyone you find interesting.
Right, the possibilities are endless.
Exactly. And they didn't just do it alone. They joined online groups.
Oh, wow. So they were storytelling with other people.
Yeah, and they would build a story together, sentence by sentence.
That sounds like so much fun.
It is, and it's great for developing those spontaneous speaking skills.
Yeah, you gotta think on your feet.
Right, and they did one more thing with storytelling that I thought was really clever.
Okay, what's that?
They recorded themselves telling stories.
Ooh, like making their own little audiobooks.
Yeah, and then they would share them with friends and ask for feedback.
That's a great idea.
It's like having your own personal language coach.
And it's not just about getting feedback on grammar and pronunciation, right?
No, it's also about learning how you sound to other people.
Becoming more self-aware.
Exactly. So they could identify areas where they needed to improve and track their progress.
That's really interesting. Okay, so we've talked about immersion, listening hacks, speaking strategies, and now storytelling.
Yeah, it's clear this person was really willing to try anything and everything to learn English.
And that's what's so inspiring about it. So what does all this mean for our listeners?
Right.
What are the big takeaways from this deep dive?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that there's no right or wrong way to learn a language.
Yeah.
This person, they tried like a million different things and just figured out what worked for them. That's pretty cool, right?
That's really inspiring. It reminds me of that saying, the best way to learn is by doing.
Totally. And not just doing, but doing it in a way that feels like natural and fun, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
Like they turned everyday things into learning opportunities, like changing their phone settings or talking to themselves in English. Pretty clever.
Yeah, they really made the process their own.
Another thing I noticed is that they didn't get hung up on being perfect all the time.
Yeah. They were okay with making mistakes and experimenting, which I think is really important.
Absolutely. Progress over perfection.
Exactly. And they focused on building a routine,
Yeah.
even if it meant starting small, which I
Yeah.
think is key.
It's like working out. You can't expect to lift a ton of weight on your first day.
Right.
You got to build up to it.
That's a good analogy. And speaking of working out, they made language learning feel fun, not like a chore, you know?
Absolutely. They incorporated things they actually enjoyed, like games and storytelling.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that learning should be enjoyable, not something you dread.
It's true. When you're having fun, you're way more likely to stick with it.
And let's not forget about those small wins, right?
Oh, yeah. Those are crucial.
Like when they understood a joke in English or ordered a coffee without switching back to their native language.
It's all about celebrating those moments.
It's so important for staying motivated.
Yeah. It's easy to focus on what we haven't accomplished yet, but we got to remember to acknowledge how far we've come.
So to recap, it sounds like the secret ingredients are consistency, engagement, and a good dose of curiosity.
Couldn't have said it better myself. This person approached language learning with a totally open mind.
Yeah, they weren't afraid to try new things.
And they celebrated every step of the way.
That's such a powerful message for our listeners, you know?
Yeah, it's a reminder that we can create our own learning adventures.
And it doesn't even have to be about learning a new language. It could be anything that sparks your interest.
Absolutely. A new skill, a hobby, anything.
As long as you approach it with that same sense of curiosity and excitement, right?
Exactly. So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a question.
Okay, what's that?
What's one small step you can take today, inspired by this deep dive, to start your own learning journey?
That's a good one. What's calling out to you?
Don't be afraid to start small. The important thing is to enjoy the ride.
Awesome. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive.
Thanks for listening.
Until next time, keep those minds curious and keep those learning adventures going.
All right, let's dive in. Today, we're exploring something a little different. We're looking at language learning, but not the kind you'd find in a textbook.
Yeah, this is unconventional.
Yeah.
Our source basically taught themselves English through pure creativity, kind of a DIY approach.
It's pretty remarkable when you think about it.
Especially because they turned limited resources into an advantage. It's really inspiring, you know.
Totally. They ditched those traditional English classes that focus so much on grammar. They just went their own way.
Imagine that, like just labeling everything in your house with English words.
Wow, talk about an immersive experience.
Exactly. Turning your home into this living, breathing textbook. But it's more than that. It's about connecting words to like actual things you experience every day.
Yeah, that's such a good point. It's not just memorizing words in a vacuum, it's weaving them into your daily life. Like they even started listening to English radio and news.
Even if they didn't understand everything at first, right?
Right. It's like slowly getting your brain used to the sounds of the language.
Yeah, kind of like training your ear to the music of it. And get this, they kept a curiosity notebook.
Oh, tell me more about that.
So they would write down any new word or phrase that piqued their interest.
I love that. It's like a scavenger hunt for language.
Totally.
Cool.
Turning learning into a game. Instead of passively absorbing vocabulary, they were actively searching for it.
So let's shift gears a bit and talk about listening skills. They are pretty fundamental when it comes to learning a language.
Absolutely. And they had some pretty unusual techniques for this. like eavesdropping.
Eavesdropping?
Well, they called it that, but it was more about like discreetly listening to conversations.
Ah, okay, so not in a creepy way.
No, no. It was all about absorbing those natural rhythms and, how people actually speak.
Makes sense. It's about picking up on the nuances that textbooks often miss.
Exactly. They were also really into those interactive videos where the characters like
Mhm.
talk to the viewer directly.
I can see how that would help.
Yeah, it's almost like having a virtual conversation partner. But my favorite has got to be this one. They'd combine nature walks with English podcasts.
Wow, that's brilliant. It's like mixing fresh air, exercise, and learning.
And on topics they actually enjoyed. So it becomes something you look forward to, right?
Right. You're creating these positive associations with learning. Speaking of things that can be a bit daunting, let's talk about actually speaking the language.
It can be scary for a lot of learners. But our source came up with some really cool strategies. Like they used to practice speaking in front of a mirror.
Interesting. Almost like giving yourself a pep talk.
Yeah, or like having a built-in speech coach. They also did a lot of role-playing.
Ah, so they would act out everyday situations.
Exactly. Things like ordering food or introducing themselves. So when they actually encountered those situations in real life,
And they'd already have a script in their head. Smart.
it takes the pressure off. And they didn't stop there. They also found online communities for English learners.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like having a supportive group to practice with.
Exactly. A safe space to make mistakes and learn from each other. Oh, and they also recorded these video journals.
Video journals, huh? Like video diaries.
Yeah, kind of. They would narrate their day or just share their thoughts in English. It was a way to track their progress.
I like it. You can literally see and hear yourself improving over time. Now, one thing that really stuck out in this whole story was the power of storytelling. It seemed to be a major turning point for them.
Oh, absolutely. It really transformed their learning. One thing that really fascinated me was how they used to swap stories with a friend who was learning their native language.
That's a cool idea. It's a win-win for everyone.
It is. You both get to practice and learn about each other's cultures at the same time.
Mm,
But they didn't just use storytelling in conversations. They also incorporated it into their study routine.
in what way?
Well, for example, they would use flashcards and pictures to create these visually engaging stories, kind of like crafting their own little mini movies.
I love that. And it makes it more memorable, too.
Right. They even wrote personalized stories based on their own life experiences, which added this like emotional layer to the whole process. So they weren't just repeating words, they were expressing themselves.
It sounds like they really found a way to make language learning their own. So we've covered a lot. But what are the big takeaways here? What can we learn from this individual's approach to language learning?
Well, I think the biggest lesson here is to embrace those mistakes.
Hmm.
They're not failures. They're opportunities to learn and grow.
Yeah, it's about having that growth mindset. And it's also about cultivating that sense of curiosity, that thirst for knowledge that pushes you to explore different methods.
Couldn't agree more. And that curiosity can make the whole learning process so much more enjoyable. It becomes an adventure.
And speaking of adventure, their emphasis on consistency really resonated with me. It's about making language learning a part of your daily routine, even if it's just for short bursts.
Exactly. Those little bits of effort really add up over time. And, it's important to celebrate those small wins along the way.
Absolutely. Every milestone, no matter how small, keeps you motivated and helps you see how far you've come. What strikes me is how these lessons go beyond language learning.
Right. They apply to any skill or field we're trying to master. It's about developing that mindset of continuous learning, adaptability, and resilience.
It's about embracing the journey with all its ups and downs and finding joy in the process of expanding your horizons.
What makes this story so compelling is how this individual took something that could be really daunting, like learning a new language, and turned it into this personalized, creative adventure. They forged their own path.
And in doing so, they didn't just master a language, they unlocked these valuable life lessons that we can all apply. It's a powerful reminder that learning doesn't have to be confined to a classroom. It can happen anywhere, anytime, as long as we're open to it.
If we zoom out a bit, this story really speaks to human ingenuity and adaptability. Faced with limitations, this learner didn't give up. They found creative solutions and thrived.
It's a testament to the human spirit and its ability to overcome obstacles when fueled by passion and determination. As we wrap up this deep dive, it makes me wonder, could we all benefit from applying some of these unconventional learning techniques to other areas of our lives?
I've been thinking the same thing. It's an intriguing thought, isn't it? What if we tackled challenges at work or even in our relationships with that same curiosity and that willingness to experiment.
Imagine the possibilities. What if, instead of fearing mistakes, we saw them as valuable feedback?
Exactly. Like stepping stones towards growth and innovation. What if we injected some playfulness and exploration into everything we do?
Instead of getting stuck in routines, maybe we could unlock a whole new level of creativity and resilience.
This deep dive has really got me thinking about the power of perspective shifts.
Me too. So, as you move forward from this deep dive, we want you to consider something. What's one area in your life where you could benefit from a more playful, experimental approach?
Is there a challenge you've been avoiding that might actually be an opportunity for growth? And how can you bring a sense of curiosity and joy to the things you do, turning even the most daunting tasks into engaging adventures?
We hope this deep dive has sparked some new ideas and inspired you to approach learning and life itself with a renewed sense of possibility. Until next time, keep exploring, keep experimenting, and keep that spark of curiosity burning bright.
Yeah, and it really ties into their whole approach, you know? Like that constant curiosity was like a driving force.
It's true. They weren't afraid to try new things, and if something didn't work, they just figured out a different way to do it.
Exactly. And that brings me to another big takeaway, that focus on consistency.
It's so important, especially when you're learning something new.
Right. Like even just short bursts of practice each day can make a huge difference over time. It's about building that habit, you know?
Yeah. It's like those small steps you take every day eventually lead you to something much bigger. And it's not just about putting in the time, it's also about acknowledging those little victories along the way.
Oh, absolutely. Celebrating those wins, no matter how small they might seem, is so crucial. It keeps you motivated and gives you that boost to keep going.
It's like a reminder that you're making progress. It's funny, though, because as we're talking about all this, I'm realizing that these lessons aren't limited to language learning, are they?
That's what's so cool about this deep dive.
Yeah.
It's about so much more than just language.
Mm.
It's about developing a mindset that you can apply to anything you're passionate about.
It's about embracing the entire journey, you know, the ups and downs, the challenges and the triumphs, and finding that joy in the process of pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone.
What I find so inspiring about this story is how this person took something that could have been so overwhelming, like learning a whole new language, and turned it into this really personal and creative adventure.
Yeah.
They didn't just follow a set path, they created their own.
And in doing so, they didn't just learn a language. They discovered these incredible life lessons that we can all benefit from. It reminds us that learning doesn't have to be this rigid, formal thing. It can be this exciting journey of discovery that happens everywhere as long as we're open to it.
And when we think about it on a larger scale, this story really showcases the power of human adaptability and resourcefulness. When faced with limitations, this learner didn't back down. They got creative, found solutions, and ultimately thrived.
It's a true testament to the resilience of the human spirit and its ability to achieve amazing things when driven by passion and a refusal to give up.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I can't help but wonder, could we all benefit from incorporating some of these unconventional learning techniques into other areas of our lives?
Yeah, it really makes you think, doesn't it? Like, what if we took that same approach to, say, our work projects or even our relationships?
I mean, the possibilities are endless. Think about it. Instead of being so afraid of making mistakes, what if we looked at them as, like, valuable feedback?
Yeah, like stepping stones that can help us learn and grow. What if we just loosened up a bit, you know?
Right. Injected a little more fun and experimentation into the things we do.
Instead of getting bogged down by routine and doing things the way they've always been done.
It's really made me realize how much our perspective can shape our experiences.
Me too. So as you go forward from this deep dive, we want to leave you with a question. What's one area in your life where you could maybe benefit from a more playful, experimental approach?
Is there a challenge you've been avoiding that might actually be an opportunity for growth in disguise?
And how can you bring a sense of curiosity and joy to the things you do, even the tough ones?
We hope this deep dive has sparked some new ideas and inspired you to approach learning and life with a renewed sense of possibility.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep experimenting, and keep that spark of curiosity alive.
All right, so I think a lot of our listeners are interested in language learning. So today we're going to be diving deep into exactly that.
Mhm.
And, it's more than just, like memorizing verbs and nouns, right?
Yeah.
This deep dive is all about like extracting these golden nuggets of wisdom from someone's firsthand experience learning English, and specifically how they kind of mastered listening and speaking.
Right.
And I think what's really cool about this person's story is how they focused on making it fun. And a natural part of their life, which I think is something we can all,
Yeah.
Learn from.
Absolutely. Yeah, and they go beyond the usual, like, listen to music advice and offer some pretty specific strategies that make it so much more effective. I think we're going to be stealing some of their ideas for sure.
Totally. Okay, so like many of us, this person found English pretty intimidating at first. I mean, even basic sentences, it felt like a puzzle, right?
Oh, yeah.
But what's interesting is how they flipped that feeling of being overwhelmed
Yeah.
into a challenge they were excited to conquer.
Right. Yeah, it's like instead of seeing the language as this giant obstacle in front of them, they reframed it as a skill they could build, step by step.
I love that.
And one of the first things they tackled was listening. But not just passively listening, they talk about active listening, which is a game changer.
Active listening. Okay, so for someone like me who tends to zone out during podcasts sometimes, what does that actually look like in practice?
Well, think of it this way. You're not just letting the sounds wash over you, right? You're
Yeah.
actively engaging with the material. So this person mentions taking notes on key ideas. But not just like any notes. They would actually try to analyze how sentences were structured, which then helped them build their own sentences later on.
Oh, so it's almost like reverse engineering the language.
Exactly.
That's so cool. And they mentioned using this with different types of listening, right? From music to podcasts.
Exactly. But here's where it gets really clever. They didn't just listen to any music. They specifically sought out English folk music. They felt the storytelling aspect helped them grasp sentence structure and idioms in a way that, like, pop music just didn't.
That's so interesting. It's like choosing your listening material strategically to match your learning goals. Now, I know they also talk about the leap from music to podcasts and audiobooks. I'm curious, did they mention any specific shows or techniques for someone just starting out?
They actually recommend starting with storytelling podcasts aimed at children.
Okay.
They're engaging, the vocabulary is manageable, and they often use clear pronunciation. And then from there, they would progressively challenge themselves with more complex content as their comprehension grew.
Okay, I can already see how these tips are way more targeted than just like, listen to more English.
Yeah.
But let's be honest, the real terror for many language learners is speaking.
Oh, absolutely. The source even calls it the beast.
Yeah.
But they also acknowledge that avoiding speaking just makes the fear worse. So what did they do? They embraced the awkwardness and started small.
So like baby steps. Did they have any tips for getting over that initial hump of feeling silly speaking in a new language?
One of the first things they did was just speak aloud to themselves, even if it was just reading a news article out loud. They said it helped build fluency and get comfortable with the sounds of the language. And then they discovered this technique called shadowing, which they swear by.
Okay, I've heard of shadowing, but to be honest, I'm not entirely sure what it entails. Do they break it down in detail?
They do. So imagine listening to a native speaker and then immediately repeating what they said, trying to match their pronunciation, rhythm, and even intonation. It's like you're becoming their vocal shadow.
That makes so much sense. It's like mimicking the way a native speaker uses their voice to convey meaning. I can see how that would be super helpful for improving pronunciation and fluency. But did they only do this solo, or did they mention practicing with others?
Oh, they definitely highlight the importance of finding a language partner for actual conversations. But even before that stage, they got creative. They would order food in English, even if they could have done it in their native language, just to get comfortable with real-life interactions.
It's like turning everyday errands into language learning opportunities.
Yeah.
I love that. And I remember they also had a somewhat unusual tip, recording themselves speaking, right?
Yes, and they weren't using it to, become the next podcasting star or anything. They would record themselves reading a passage or having like a mock conversation and then listen back, paying attention to their pronunciation and grammar.
That's a fantastic way to become more self-aware of your strengths and weaknesses. It's like having a personal language coach in your pocket.
Yeah.
So we've covered some seriously actionable tips for listening and speaking. But what I found really fascinating was their approach to storytelling as a language learning tool.
It's a technique that often gets overlooked, but it's incredibly powerful. They talk about how reading short stories, especially those with vivid descriptions and dialogue, help them internalize sentence structures and expand their vocabulary naturally.
I could see how immersing yourself in a good story would make the learning process so much more engaging. Did they mention any specific authors or genres that they found particularly helpful?
They were really into classic mystery novels.
Oh,
They said the suspense kept them hooked and the dialogue was full of witty expressions and colloquialisms. Plus, trying to figure out who doing it in a different language. That's a fun challenge.
that's a great point. It's like turning language learning into a game. But they didn't just passively read stories, did they? They took it a step further.
Exactly. They would try to retell the stories in their own words, either aloud or in writing. This forced them to actively recall vocabulary and grammar and think in English instead of translating in their head.
That's brilliant. It's like taking those puzzle pieces of language and putting them together to create your own picture. And I love how it ties back to the listening skills we discussed earlier. They mentioned using podcasts and audiobooks to further enhance their storytelling approach, right?
Yes. They would listen to a story and then try to summarize it or even create their own alternative ending. It's a fantastic way to practice comprehension, creative thinking, and speaking all at the same time.
It's like they've created this amazing feedback loop where all the skills reinforce each other. Now, before we get too carried away with the magic of storytelling, I want to make sure we highlight some of the core principles that underpin this person's success.
Absolutely. And the first one, which they emphasize throughout their journey, is consistency. They made language learning a part of their daily routine, even if it was just for 15 minutes some days.
It's like that saying, a little bit every day goes a long way. And speaking of journeys, there are bound to be bumps along the road. Did they talk about how they dealt with setbacks and those inevitable moments of self-doubt?
They did. And I think this is where their mindset really shines through. They talk about how they reframed mistakes as opportunities to learn
Okay.
instead of getting discouraged. They would analyze what went wrong, figure out the correct way to say it, and move on.
That's such a powerful approach. It's about turning those moments of, ugh, I messed up, into, okay, how can I learn from this?
Exactly. And they even had a little ritual. They would keep a notebook where they would write down their language wins, no matter how small. It could be using a new idiom in a conversation, or finally understanding a podcast without subtitles.
I love that. It's like creating a tangible record of your progress, which can be so motivating when you're feeling stuck. And finally, let's not forget the importance of immersion.
Yes. They truly embraced the idea of surrounding themselves with English as much as possible. But they went beyond just watching movies or listening to music. They joined online communities of language learners, participated in virtual language exchanges, and even started following English-speaking comedians on social media.
It's like they created their own little English-speaking world, even if they weren't physically living in an English-speaking country.
Exactly. And by doing so, they turned language learning from an isolated activity into a social and cultural experience.
So we've covered a ton of ground here, from active listening strategies to the power of storytelling. What stands out to you as the most impactful takeaway from this person's journey?
I think what's fascinating to me is how they combine traditional methods with a lot of creativity and self-awareness. They didn't just follow a textbook, they crafted their own unique approach based on their personality and interests.
And they clearly weren't afraid to experiment and try new things, even if they felt a bit silly at times. It reminds me that language learning shouldn't be this rigid, intimidating process. It can be fun, it can be personal, and it can be a journey of self-discovery.
Absolutely. It's about finding what works best for you, embracing the journey, and celebrating every step along the way.
Now, as we move towards wrapping up this deep dive, I can't help but think about all the other creative ways people are incorporating English into their lives. I'm curious, what are some of the more unconventional approaches you've come across?
Well, there's this growing trend of people using video games to learn English.
Oh, that's interesting. Tell me more.
Think about it. Many video games have complex storylines, rich dialogue, and require you to interact with other players in English. It's immersive, engaging, and can be a really effective way to learn vocabulary and grammar in context.
I can see how that would be particularly appealing for younger learners who are already passionate about gaming. It's like sneaking in language learning while having fun.
Exactly, and it goes beyond just the language itself. You're also learning about different cultures, problem-solving skills, and teamwork, all in English.
It's a fantastic example of how language learning can be integrated into activities we already enjoy. It's not about setting aside separate time for studying. It's about making it a natural part of our lives.
And that brings us to another thought-provoking idea. We've talked about the cognitive benefits of language learning. But what about the emotional and social aspects?
Ooh, I love this. Tell me more.
Well, imagine the sense of accomplishment you feel when you can finally understand a movie without subtitles, or hold a conversation with someone in their native language.
It's a huge confidence boost. And it opens up opportunities for connection and friendship that might not have been possible before.
Exactly. And those connections, those shared experiences, can enrich our lives in profound ways. They can broaden our perspectives, challenge our assumptions, and help us see the world through more compassionate eyes.
It's like language becomes a bridge, connecting us to people and cultures that might have felt distant or unfamiliar before.
And that bridge leads to a richer, more vibrant, and more meaningful life.
Beautifully said. And on that inspiring note, I think it's time to bring this deep dive to a close.
I agree. It's been a pleasure exploring this topic with you.
Likewise. And to our listener, thank you for joining us on this journey of linguistic exploration.
We hope you've gleaned some valuable insights and inspiration for your own language learning adventure.
Remember, fluency is within your reach. And with each step you take, you're not just learning a language, you're expanding your horizons and unlocking a world of possibilities.
Now, before you go, we'd love to hear from you.
What are some of the unique or unexpected ways you've incorporated English into your daily life? What challenges have you faced and what triumphs have you celebrated? Share your stories, your tips, your questions in the comments below.
Let's create a community of language learners, supporting and inspiring each other on this incredible journey.
Because together we can break down barriers, build bridges, and discover the transformative power of language.
Until next time, keep those language fires burning.
And remember, the world is waiting to hear your voice.
Yeah.
It's like you can almost feel those walls breaking down when you connect with someone in their own language.
It really is remarkable. It makes me think of that quote by Nelson Mandela: if you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. If you talk to him in his language, that goes to his heart.
Oh, wow.
And it just emphasizes the power of language to create genuine understanding and bridge those cultural gaps.
It's such a powerful quote, and so true. It's a reminder that learning English isn't just about acquiring a skill, it's about opening doors to connect with people on a deeper level and experience the world from different perspectives.
Yeah, and it challenges our assumptions and helps us cultivate empathy and compassion for others, leading to a richer and more meaningful life experience.
That's beautifully said. What a beautiful way to sum up the impact of language learning. It's not just about fluency, it's about personal growth and forging connections that enrich our lives in countless ways.
And maybe someone listening to this deep dive will be inspired to share their own language learning success story and encourage others to embark on their own linguistic adventures.
Wouldn't that be amazing? On that note of inspiration, I think it's time for us to wrap up this episode.
It has been a fascinating journey, exploring these unique language learning strategies.
To our listener, we hope this deep dive has provided you with some valuable insights and practical tips to support your own English language journey.
Remember, consistency, courage, and a bit of creativity will take you far.
And don't forget the power of community. Connect with other language learners, share your experiences, support each other through those highs and lows.
Together, we can make this journey more enjoyable, rewarding, and ultimately more successful.
So keep those language fires burning, embrace those challenges, celebrate those wins, and never stop exploring this amazing world of language.
Until next time, happy learning.